Okay, in chapter 2, we're talking about these elements and principles of design. These are, you can kind of think of this as like the tool bag that all artists have to use when they make art. And, one thing to say right from the start is that, these are many, many possibilities here, but not all artists use all these elements and principles all of the time they choose. In fact, Yoji Yamamoto in the last chapter is a good example. He chose not to use color at all, but used other things like shape and volume and texture. So this XY graph is a good example of how different elements and principles can be used together. One way to think of it maybe is that the elements, the ones on this axis, are really the tangible things that you see in art: line, shape, color, form. The principles are more kind of abstract ideas, that you have pattern, that you have high contrast. If we look at this chart, I can point out a few examples. If you combine line with emphasis, you get a composition like this. It has a very strong, bold line emphasizing a portion of the composition. If you combine color with pattern, you may get a work of art like this. So I will show you a couple of artists, examples of their work, artists that are using particular elements or principles as part of their work. This first one, Many Marylands by Andy Warhol. I'm going to show him again next week talking about media, but in terms of these ideas of elements and principles, obviously one that he relies on and did throughout his career is repetition. He's repeated the same image over and over again throughout this composition, which could represent a number of things. Marilyn Monroe was a star who kind of got used up by the system. So maybe it's like saying that these stars that come along are just a dime a dozen, that there are many, many of them more to come. It's reminiscent of consumer culture. Go to a grocery store or Target or Walmart, and the shelves are full of many of the same kind of thing. Also, he's using color as part of his work. He's not an unskilled artist. He's purposely making bad prints as well as good prints as part of this composition. Another artist who uses a particular element to really good purpose is artist Ron Mueck. So this is the artist himself working on this particular sculpture. So scale is something that Ron Mueck has chosen to use. There's these massive sculptures made out of cast latex. They are something that are really overwhelming when you see them. This is the size of a normal person here. So it makes you think about perhaps your place in the world. These people are often in very personal moments. And so when you approach a sculpture this size, it really makes you think about your place in the world. Makes you think about your own personal struggles, and that when you have them, they seem really, really big. Other people might not think so. So here's a good example of scale, along with other elements and principles being used to great effect. Another thing that I can point out here is that these things that art teachers call elements and principles, these are strategies that artists have developed over human history. They are strategies that perhaps attract the human eye. They're things that are attractive to us. When you think about it, they're really deeply human kinds of phenomena. Hopefully this particular image doesn't make you sick by looking at it, but it's a really good example of this, that we as humans are attracted to patterns. And if you think about that, patterns in nature are often warning signs. Snakes, bees, tigers, animals that are dangerous, insects that are dangerous, often have bright colors and patterns on them. So we have evolved to be attracted to really prominent patterns. If I move that around, you can see this kind of phenomenon, that it vibrates. So that's something that's really hardwired into your brain, into your eyes, that you see these kind of phenomena. And then the last thing I can point out for this week is this idea of the relativity of color, and it's really very similar to what I was just describing. These are phenomena that we as humans perceive. We move from one environment to another, and our brains literally adjust, our eyes literally adjust to those surroundings to make them seem, quote, normal. But when in fact fluorescent light indoors is very different from natural light outdoors. So this is kind of an abstract but very real example of how our brains adjust to the relativity of our surroundings. That color appears to change when he moves it around, but it's because it is surrounded by other colors that make us see it in a different way.